Investor Steve Torso. It's great to be back at a wholesale investor event. The last time I was a participant in a wholesale investor event was back in October 2017, just before I was floating, actually, SelfWealth on the ASX. Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. That actually was a very worthwhile event. I think we raised in excess of 500 grand, so up to 5% of what we needed for that IPO was done through that wholesale investor event. So I'm a very passionate supporter of this organisation. So it's been very, very nice to be asked to come and do a keynote this afternoon. This is very much a personal story. It will lead into a little bit of my next venture. Sucker for my punishment. I'm about to go into my third thing, but this is very much a personal story. So bear with me as I go through it. Appearances can be very deceiving, and things are never as they seem when you go into the vortex of a startup founder. I still have chills down my spine going back to the times of the early days at SelfWealth when I thought that what I was doing was so much more important than what other people were doing. It was such a fallacy. I put myself in this weird pedestal that I am a startup founder. I am very important, and what I'm doing is more important than what you're doing. But I look back on that now and I realise that was just a choice that I made. And as I go through the next sort of 15 minutes or so, you'll get a true understanding of how I've come to that realisation. People make a choice to be a founder, and you would not make it as a normal course of business because it is a very, very difficult road to follow. My wife has always said to me, and she still says to me, that, and this is a courtesy of her background and her father and her family, that a salary is safe and that equity is something you can't rely on. It's something that, it may vest. You have to stick around long enough in a company to get it. And also, if it does vest, can you actually sell it? Can you actually get any value from it? And I've experienced that through different companies that I've worked through in the past. I've worked at the CBA and I got equity. And whether it's because I didn't stick around long enough to get it, or small little financial planning practices that I used to work in. And I also got equity in them, but that really didn't translate to anything. And that really leads me to what does it mean? The age-old question, I think, for to be or not to be. With being a startup founder, are you born or are you bred? Almost sounds like serial killer stuff, but I really think that 75 to 85% of serial killers. Now I've got it on the brain. I've just watched the Jeffrey Dahmer thing. I think 75% are born or at least raised in the first 10 years because you'll see on the slide, it talks about resilience. And I think that nearly 100% of startups would succeed if there was infinite funding and you can get through infinite amount of pivots on your idea and you've got market traction and you didn't retreat to that door of security that when it got too tough, you went to go back to get a job. So I really do think that this concept of resilience and being born or the makeup of your character is so important when it comes to what it's like to be a founder. And because I reckon a lot of people run for the exit really early. And leaving a solid job in the first instance as well is also very much a risky business. So that, I reckon, the born or bred, the nurture versus nature thing, I think a lot of it is you need to be born or at least raised to have resilience from a very early age. Every startup founder has a favourite quote and everyone lives by it. And my favourite is from a guy called William Faulkner. And it is, you can't swim for the furthest horizons until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. And that is so true, yet again, of that born or bred thing. Can you actually go and do that? Can you actually leave safety? What does it mean to me? It means, that quote, it means mystery. It means a challenge. It means letting go of an anchor. It means going and searching for a new identity. And that really sums me up. I was a square peg in a round hole through my career. I live in Melbourne now, but I went to the University of Sydney, not too far from here, and I fell into finance through one of my best friends at Colonial First State at 52 Mutton Place here. Actually, before it was even Colonial First State fund managers sitting next to Chris Cuff and Greg Perry as employee number 32. And I cut my teeth on finance, and I was good at maths at school, but I never really worked out what I wanted to do and what it was all about for me. I wanted to play cricket for Australia, and that never happened. I turned a 3-year university degree into a 6-year one because halfway through my second year, I deferred to become a rock star. That didn't work out. But that being said, though, we did support the cockroaches all through Sydney and all the pubs. And at the end of that, oh God, I hate their songs. I hated their songs. But I was asked to be a Wiggle at the end of that because they turned into the Wiggles, and I turned it down because I was 23 and I thought, no, I want to pick up chicks and be a rock star. I don't want to deal with kids. Anyway, funny story, symbiosis. My 14-year-old daughter is going to a Halloween party as the Wiggles in a couple of weeks' time. So that's really weird. So all these different dreams I had, and I coasted through, I suppose is the best way to say, my career until I started SelfWealth in 2011, because I always had these dreams of doing these different things, and it really came down to, and the music thing, that morphed into being a songwriter. And I like creating something out of nothing and sharing it with the world, and hopefully the world can get some benefit out of it, whether it's writing a song and they experience that, or it's creating a business and I can help people. And that it took me a long time to realise that that's what I wanted and that's what I needed, and that's what got me out of bed in the morning. So in 2011, 40 years old, and SelfWealth was nothing more than a PowerPoint. And for those who don't know in the room, SelfWealth is an online broker. It's now Australia's largest non-bank online broker. I had this concept initially of it being this community of self-directed investors. I, as a self-directed investor myself, I was working at the CBA at the time. I didn't want to pay all the fees associated with portfolio construction, advice, administration, etc. So I wanted to create a social network of investors at that point in time to better invest. And self-directed investors, what's the greatest cohort of that? Well, self-managed super funds. Okay, who looks after self-managed super funds the most? Well, accountants. Well, who touches accountants the most? Well, that was a company called BGL that kept on jumping out to me. That's a competitor of Class. So I cold called the guy called Ron Lesh, who was the managing director of BGL. I had my CBA hat on at the time. I was still at the CBA. I got in the door and I apologised profusely the moment I got in there. I said, look, sorry, Ron, I'm here under my own guise. I want to give you a quick rundown on my new idea. And he was pretty pissed off. But he gave me my 15 minutes and I did my best spiel, my first ever pitch, really, of a business. And at the end, he said 4 things. He said, Andrew, okay, that's fine. Okay, I'll seed your business. I'll give you some money. I want exclusivity, so you can't deal with any of my competitors, Class, etc. I want to be on your board because you've got no idea what you're doing, and you need some guidance. But probably the biggest thing of all, he said, you have to resign within 2 weeks. And you need to show to me that you're fair dinkum about what you're doing. You've been going and telling everybody about this SelfWealth idea for the last year and a half, where you've had this safety net of this job, the CBA. Show me that you're fair dinkum, go and do it. And that was November 2011, and that was just before Christmas, 3 young kids, pretty hefty mortgage. And so that was a difficult decision with my wife. It takes me back to it right now. But suffice to say, all things happen. She gave me 6 months, by the way. So, that takes us into 2012, and I see Paul Niederer standing at the back of the room there. And I used Australian Small Scale Offerings Board, the ASOB platform, in early 2012 to raise the capital. And that was a very enjoyable experience. So thanks, Paul, for that experience. That helped put some compliance behind what we did. We raised, I think, $1.8 million over 2012. And I came out with this community-based social network of construction of portfolio so you can follow the best people. What I learned very quickly over the next 2 or 3 years was that there was a very underwhelming take-up of the platform. A lot of people loved it, and there were some great first adopters and first users, and they loved it, and the feedback that came back was fantastic. I initially outsourced the IT. I had to bring that internally because it was very difficult for me not to sit around and turn in my chair and yell at someone and go do stuff on a whiteboard rather than deal with someone in Sydney. I was based in Melbourne at the time. Excuse me. So that was an amazing journey in its own right, bringing an internal IT team in. But we were running out of money. It felt like I had the paddles out every 6 months, trying to raise money, selling the dream. Self-managed super funds meets fintech. It's a big thing in 2012, 13, 14. But the big change for the business was in 2015 when we used to use Yodlee. I don't know if you know Yodlee, for our screen scrapers to get our data in. But a lot of people were saying, I love your solution. I'm constructing new portfolios and I'm outperforming, but I'd love to go and execute. I've got to go out to CommSec or BuildDirect or all these other firms to execute. But then we would suck the data back in and we use Yodlee to do that. Can we do it within your solution? It looks and feels great. It's fantastic. So that started me on a 2-year journey of trying to work out how to be consistent with my ethos of flat fees. One of the reasons why I started SelfWealth in the first place was to reduce the fees in financial services. And I initially came out with a subscription fee, and why the ASX in brokerage fees charge a percentage on how much you trade was just an anathema to me. I didn't like that. Why you do a $1 million trade versus a $100,000 trade and you pay 10 times as much is just wrong. You get the same level of service. But the brokers have lived on that forever. So I wanted to try to work out to have a flat fee brokerage service. I was told it was impossible, but I tried as hard as I could, and I was finally able to convince the Bank of New York through Pershing, their local subsidiary, to take a gamble on me. And I went out in 2016 with a $9.50 flat brokerage fee, even though it's costing me $13 for a trade flat. But it's not, if I got the trades right and got the volumes right, we'd come under that. And we did that, and we were able to renegotiate, and that really changed everything for us. Suddenly we had all these customers. People understood $9.50 flat fee brokerage. I don't have to pay CommSec $19.95 plus 1%. We can just go to SelfWealth. And the other big thing, the lucky timing thing for us, was the Royal Commission in 2017 that really put a spotlight on all the fees that the banks and financial services people were charging. So a lot of people were calling us up and saying, we don't want to use CommSec or NabTrade anymore, but who are you? Why do you exist? Can we trust you? So that was a big opportunity for us. And that was the main reason why we went to float 2017, was a credibility piece. We were probably too early to float, but we floated anyway, and that really changed everything, that we were a publicly listed company, open to scrutiny, and we were able to compete with the likes of the banks, the CommSecs and the NabTrades of the world. So that really, really helped us. So that gets me to the journey and the toll it took on me. And it felt like I always had this end goal to get to, and I got there, and I fell in a heap, and I wanted to work out what the next goal was going to be, and then I achieved that, then I fell in a heap. And all through that journey, I didn't take any money out of SelfWealth. Although it's fun to be involved, and I hired this great team, and it was quite sexy to be involved in the fintech industry, it was quite soul-destroying to go home to the family. And SelfWealth was a 4-letter word with our kids. I started to retreat from friends. I stopped calling my parents. My showers turned from 10 minutes into 45 minutes. I sat down in the shower. I don't know if that's happened to a lot of founders in the room, just to escape. And really, my life just morphed into something that it probably shouldn't have been, even though it should have been something really exciting. But I was never able to get anything out of the company. And my wife's words were ringing in my ears about this security, this equity, and what didn't mean anything after so long. Even after we floated, we didn't take anything out of that. The next 2 years were pretty tough, 2017 and 2019 being a CEO of a publicly listed business. I achieved some great things in that time. I raised $100 million, the most amount ever raised for a third-party ETF, and we launched the SelfWealth ETF on the courtesy of Graham Tuckwell helped with that on the ASX. Almost 2 years after the day we listed the company, we listed the ETF, and I fell in a heap. I was done. It was November 2019, and I said to the board, I need a break. I was not living a healthy lifestyle, and my superpower had gone. And my superpower was always I was able to think through and analyse through problems quicker than anyone else could. The bigger the challenge, that's what got me really, really excited. And that had disappeared. I'd lost the ability to do that. I felt like I'd been drawn back to the crowd. I was managing a team and a business, which is very important, but my effectiveness had disappeared. So I stepped back, I took a break, and it was Christmas time, it was 2019, COVID hit, and the time I spent over that with my kids was absolutely fantastic. COVID hit, I started to speak to the board again. I realised that I didn't want to go back, and I officially stepped down from SelfWealth in the middle of 2020. And I finally got the opportunity to take something out of the company, which was lovely. My next thing, which is my next learning, is how am I doing on time? Was another big company reached out to me and said, Andrew, can you come and help us with some of your thinking and some of our business models? So I joined. So I had this big decision to make. I could never be an employee again. After my SelfWealth experience, I could never go back to being an employee. I was asked to be CEO of another company. Or this other company said, look, we'll set up this other company for you so you can do this thing in the private markets. And we'll take 75%. I invested the rest. And 2021 was pretty much doing that. It was called Platform X. It's since been bought out by a company called FinClear. It's now been rebranded FCX. But the journey I learned out of that was no matter how independent a board may be, if someone owns 75% of a business, you're never going to have your own say. And I get the best out of myself when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, sweat through stuff, solve a problem, work all the way to 9 o'clock, 6 hours, and I've done it. But to be told at 10 o'clock that that's not the way we want to do things, it's not the way I can work. So that was maybe a nice commercial outcome for me. But 2022 has been thinking about, okay, what do I do? What do I do next? And that takes me to Liquidise, which you can see to my direct left here. And it comes back to this moral of my story, which is, at what point do you think you've got success? Not to be too crass, but I love the song by Miley Cyrus called The Climb. It's all about the climb. It's not what's on the other side. Whenever I get to the top, and I've been to the top a couple of times, the perceived top, I just feel empty. It doesn't feel good to me. This climb thing, I want to reinvent the constantly going up the mountain, constantly trying to achieve these goals. And I've got to work out at what point do I get to that top and go, I need to reinvent myself. So Liquidise comes back to my wife's comment about go and get a decent job with a salary because equity's not worth anything. Liquidise solves that. Liquidise is all about turning equity into something that's liquid. And taking the best of DeFi, taking the Uniswap models back into a traditional market structure, and for you to be enabled as a founder, and more importantly, employee share plans and early shareholders within businesses to be able to cash in on their equity along the way. You don't need a buyer and a seller. Liquidity is always available. Anyway, thank you for your time, for listening to me ramble on about my personal story. Come and have a chat to me and Matt here on the stand. We'll be here for the next couple of hours.